Good evening. I'm Alva Adams Mason, Director of Multicultural Business Alliance and Strategy and Dealer Relations at Toyota Motor North America. Toyota is proud to sponsor the 2020 National Association of Black Journalists and National Association of Hispanic Journalists Joint Convention. We've had a long relationship with both organizations that's grown stronger over the years. We appreciate the opportunity to interact with journalists who often are the first voice we hear in the morning or the last before we sleep. Although this meeting is for the first time virtual, we wouldn't let this stop us from being a part of this distinct gathering of leaders, companies, and journalists. As the #1 automobile brand in market share for African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, Toyota welcomes the opportunity to share our thoughts and our ideas to help make our community stronger. We do this by championing the candid and honest dialogue at events like this. We do this also by giving respect to the people in the places where we live and work. And we also do this by demonstrating inclusivity in the actions we take. Despite the unprecedented global pandemic before us, we see crowds in the street, young and old alike, protesting social justice, demanding fair and equitable treatment as citizens of the United States. You can hear and feel the sense of urgency, not only in our nation, but across the world. People are seeking remedies to correct generations of systemic racism, prejudices, and societal ills. It is from the journalists who are members of these organizations who risk their lives daily to share the stories, to keep us abreast of local and national situations, or who hold up the megaphone so we can hear the chant, Black Lives Matter. Toyota, thank you for your commitment to the profession and the sacrifices you make to deliver the news. We all thank you. Toyota created this evening's town hall. Where do we go from here? What's our collective strategy to overcome social injustice, to bring together the critical voices who can take us through this journey for social justice? The drive for social justice is not easy or smooth. The drive for social justice doesn't follow a straight path. The drive for social justice can lead down very rough roads. It also isn't a short journey. However, it's a worthy path to pursue. Social justice is realized through change, and that change is forged through political leadership, civic action, and community engagement. We hope this town hall will inspire and empower you to lend your mind, passion, and influence to developing much needed solutions. I would now like to turn this over to the moderator for our town hall, Eric Deggans from National Public Radio. Eric is an award-winning journalist and author of Race Baiter, How the Media Wields Dangerous Words to Divide a Nation, a look at how prejudice, racism, and sexism fuel some elements of modern media. Deggans is also currently a media analyst contributor for MSNBC and NBC News. In 2013, Deggans was awarded the Florida Press Club's first ever Diversity Award, honoring his coverage of issues involving race in media. He received the Legacy Award from the National Association of Black Journalists, A&E Task Force, an honor bestowed to seasoned A&E journalists who are at the top of their careers. I now turn it over to Eric.
All right, Alva, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. And thanks a lot to Toyota for bringing us all together. So we're going to have a spirited discussion about social justice. And our panel is an esteemed one. We've got Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League. We've got Jerika Duncan, the national correspondent for CBS This Morning, and Renee Montgomery, a guard for the Atlanta Dream in the WNBA. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. And wow, you know, the name of this session, where do we go from here? What's our collective strategy to overcome social injustice? Mark, you're the head of the Urban League. You got to have a plan. What's the strategy? You tell us.
Got a real detailed plan. First of all, I want to thank you, Eric and Jerika and Renee, Alva and Tracy. for the patience that you all had with us as we worked through the technology to get this underway. Thank you so much. But also, I want to thank Toyota for their long relationship with the National Urban League and for supporting Black and Hispanic journalists. And I want to certainly, Eric and Jerika, congratulate you and encourage you in your career as important storytellers and truth sayers in this environment. And Renee, thank you for your advocacy after a very distinguished athletic career. The question before us is, will this be a moment or will it be a new movement? Will it be a moment of outrage and anger that translated into protests that'll wither like a raisin in the sun? Or will it continue to give energy and purpose? And will it morph into a new, energized 21st century movement for social and economic justice? That's the question. And that's also the task. Because Dr. King asked in the 1960s, where do we go from here? And we know that after tremendous progress in the 1960s, that the movement for social justice and civil rights, beginning with the election of Richard Milhouse Nixon, faced a tremendous backlash in America, a concerted effort in the courts, a concerted effort in the Congress, before school districts, to thwart the progress of the Warren Court, to thwart the progress of the movement that was led by the Big Six, most notably by Martin Luther King, to thwart the efforts by the new energized young people who were active and involved both in civil rights but also in the anti-war movement. And there was a backlash. And the backlash slowed down and created, if you will, a battle royale for the last 50 years between whether this nation is going to move forward or whether this nation is going to stall and move backward on issues of social justice, economic justice, and civil rights. We all have a task to do, no matter where we sit, whether you sit as a great journalist, whether you sit as a business executive, an elected official, a student, whether you sit as just a passionate, concerned citizen who, as an advocate, it's our task to make sure that this moment is a movement. And the reason why this moment has to become a movement, lest we be the generation that bequeaths to our children the challenge to relitigate, refight the battles that our parents and grandparents fought. That's what's at stake. Is this going to be a moment that translates into a movement for a broader, continuous, sustainable battle for social and economic justice? 50 years after the great gains of the civil rights movement, disparities are everywhere. Health disparities laid bare by COVID, economic disparities that we see every day, the racial wealth gap, income inequality, disparities in the quality of schools that children attend, disparities between Black and white graduation rate, college matriculation rates. And that's what we mean by structural racism, that built into the American system are disparities, to the point where people began to think it's normal, it's a normal state of affairs. It is not a normal state of affairs. It was an architected, designed state of affairs. And our job is to fracture it, to take it apart, and to create a new and different vision for 21st century America. And that's what we have to do as Black people who hold the legacy of the first people who came here enslaved in 1619, who hold the legacy of Crispus Attucks, the legacy of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, the legacy of Marcus Garvey, the legacy of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Dorothy Height and Malcolm X, who hold the legacy as journalists of Vernon Jarrett and Chuck Stone and Mal Good and all the great African-American journalists, Carol Jenkins, who hold the legacy of Earl Lloyd and Bill Russell and Oscar Robertson in sports, who hold the legacy, in my case, of people like Whitney Young, Carl Stokes, Richard Hatcher, Shirley Chisholm, and the like. We're standing on these legacies, and it has to be our determination to utilize where we sit to work and fight to make sure that this is a movement. Is there a plan? Ideas for change have been on the table for years. Ideas for change, whether it's how to increase African-American home ownership, whether it's equalizing funding for schools, whether it's creating universal access to healthcare. The ideas are there. The plan is easily assembled. The will, the determination, the political power to make it happen is where the battle lies.
That's an interesting point that you make, because as we're seeing whether or not this is a moment or a movement, I feel like Black journalists are sort of caught in the middle here. Black journalists are trying to, on the one hand, cover what's happening, but on the other hand, also be a voice for justice and against bigotry. And Jerika, I want to ask you, how do you ride that line between wanting to be an advocate for social justice and for diversity and for fairness, which are all tenets that sort of hook into what we do as journalists, but not cross the line into advocacy, or sometimes people accuse Black journalists of, quote, having an agenda. How do you strike that balance, and what do you think about where Black journalists fit in this moment?
I think your record speaks for itself. I think your storytelling speaks for itself. So it's important to remain curious first and foremost, and make sure that you are asking the questions on behalf of the people that are watching you. I agree with everything Mark said, and this is why we wait for someone like Mr. Mark Morial, because he's such a wealth of knowledge in terms of the history and what we need to think about moving forward. As a journalist, I'm inspired by what does this look like 6 months from now? I'm pitching stories right now to my senior producers about something I want to start looking into over the course of the next year. While it is personal, it's a story. It's always been a story. It's part of the history of this country. And I think when I look at the many issues the Black community is facing, one issue that I think probably could use more attention is the Black family, because I think about the breakdown of that and how that then leads to a number of things that we talk about when you think of home ownership. Well, of course, it's going to be harder to own a home when you don't have those two incomes in that one house. And I think, aside from police brutality, the socioeconomic piece is huge. It's absolutely a problem. When you look at home ownership, when you look at salary disparities, and that's how you then get that power. So I think pitching those types of stories that, again, it's not even so much, oh, here I am, a Black person pitching a story. It's a story. Whether a white person pitches the story or myself, it deserves coverage. And it's up to us as journalists to keep making sure that we stay curious in this moment. So I don't feel like it's hard to sort of draw the line. What I do in my personal life is my personal business. But when I am a journalist and I put on that hat, I'm very serious about asking questions to understand who, what, when, where, why, and how, and being critical of the very organizations that I think are doing a phenomenal job. But it also becomes, understanding and not being afraid to ask, so where did the money go? And how does this now look for people who are the very folks that we're talking about, marginalized? Because even as we all sit here on this panel, we're not the average, if you will. Most of us are doing okay when you look at the fact that we have jobs right now, and there are millions of people that don't. And it's going to be another 6 months to a year before sort of things get back to where they were, people feel more confident about spending money again. So I think there's so many issues right now that aren't just black and white. And it's up to us to make sure that we push that and we ask the tough questions.
So Renee, You made headlines earlier this year when you announced that you were going to step away from playing and devote yourself more fully to pursuing social justice. So I'm kind of interested in what's the thought process? How'd you get to the point where you decided you were going to do this? And what does that look like once you sort of stepped away from playing and plunged yourself into social justice?
Yeah, so I want to echo what Mark said, sort of thanking you guys for having me on there, especially Toyota, making the investment. That's an investment, making the investment to give this platform. So I love seeing companies make the investment. But, for me, it started with the string of tragedies, just like everyone else. We had Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and then George Floyd. So I was affected, I believe, the same way that every other person that watched these videos were affected. And then it got to the point where I was talking to my parents, and a lot of stuff I just didn't know about them. And to their defense, they sheltered me from a world that I didn't know that they dealt with, in a sense of that hands-on. We all know that our parents probably faced some racism just because of the time frame, but just to hear their stories, that lit a fire in me. And it was a sad moment in the sense that my mom, she was an activist trying to pursue not having to deal with this. She was trying to have a better world for children. And now, fast forward in 2020, there were protests going on right outside of my door. There were different things going on right outside of my door, me living here in Atlanta. So that struck me. That struck a nerve in me that, again, we don't want this to be a moment. We want this to be a movement. And that's why I pin moments equal momentum. So we have this moment right now where everybody's looking at everything. Everybody, we see Mississippi change their state flag. We see statues going down left and right. We see buildings getting changed. We see a lot happening, in this little bit of time. This moment it's building. It's building into momentum. It's building into a movement. And so I feel proud about that. And a lot of people are asking me, well, what's going to be your ROI for the business people? Like, well, how will you know that it was worth it? I'm like, it's already worth it. If you look around, it's already worth it. I'm sitting here on this panel. I've been on all the major platforms, MSNBC, CNN. And why that's worth it for me is because I truly believe that conversations matter. So people having the conversation with me about me being from West Virginia, 3.6% Black population, people understanding how I grew up, that matters to me. And what I'm going to do moving forward is going to matter to HBCU students, because I think with this time frame that we're in, you see a lot of universities getting hit hard. You see a lot of different sports getting canceled. But think about that for HBCUs. They were already functioning below the level of money that they needed. So imagine now getting hit by this pandemic. So one of the things that I'm going to be doing that I hope everyone joins me in helping is to kind of save Morris Brown. It's an HBCU founded by a slave. They have a long, rich history, but they lost their accreditation and they're on their way back. So if people are asking what my ROI is, it will be to save Morris Brown, get them that last yard, make them accredited and a functioning HBCU. So that's going to be what my championship would be this year. So I'm going to be releasing things soon. And I know Jerica talked about asking the question, where is the money? So we're going to keep a long tally. Our money is going straight to Morris Brown, but I'm going to have my website is going to be momentsequalmomentum.com, and we're going to just get a tally. We have a large amount to make, so that's going to be my whole off season this year is raising funds for that. So I'm excited, and that's where I'm at with it.
All right, and the term ROI means return on investment, just for people who might not know. Now, Renee, I do want to ask you another question, because it also emerged in the news that one of the co-owners of the Atlanta Dream, Kelly Loeffler, was critical of the WNBA's plans to honor the Black Lives Matter movement. So in addition to you taking a step back from your career, you might also be angering somebody who co-owns the team you play for. What did you think when you heard about that? Are you concerned at all that some of your activism might produce some sort of response from the people who own your team?
I'm not too concerned. I always talk about perspective, and perspective matters. Before I announced that I was going to be sitting out this WNBA season, a lot of people had a lot of negative things to say about athletes that might do that. You know, we saw it in how they talked about it on the NBA side. But once I opted out and I told people my views and why I'm doing it, people accepted it. People accepted it and were positive about me sitting out. So when I saw that my owner, you know, she had a perspective that I thought, maybe she like there's a break here, and she thinks that the movement is about one thing and maybe it's not. So I wrote an open letter to her, basically explaining the movement that I'm excited about. So the movement that I'm excited about, people are trying to make it about a hashtag. You know, is it a capital B? Is it a capital L? Is it a capital M? That means a whole different thing. Now we're talking about an organization. No, the movement I'm talking about is the one my parents were involved in. There were no hashtags then. There was no social media then. We're talking about a movement for rights. We're talking about equality, equity. We're talking about these things. Let's not make it about who owns the organization. So I think that that's what I was trying to get my point across, was that now you start to see a lot of division and people trying to do division and divide us into different groups. No, we're all trying to do a movement that is about something that happened before hashtags. So let's not make it about the hashtag. Let's not make it about capital letters. And so that's my only feeling. I think that if people make it about anything other than that, that's when the problems come in. So the movement that we want to continue happened way before hashtags.
Yeah, Eric, I was gonna, add a couple of thoughts. First of all, Renee, bravo to working to save Morris Brown College, a great college founded not only by slaves but connected to the AME Church, and as such, one of the few historically Black colleges and universities in the country that was actually founded by Black people. Many of them were founded by white religious groups in connection with Black people, founded by states under the state land grant, the federal land grant system. Congratulations. And then the second thing I want to tell you, you're in good company if you're from West Virginia, because that's where T.D. Jakes is from.
Yeah.
So you take a good strong bow. And I want to talk to you all as journalists for a minute. I know, and say to you, it's interesting. Your question, I thought, was a very fair question, Eric, and that is Black journalists and the tension between being objective and being a part of the story. I think what Black journalists do is simply level the playing field and level the perspective. So, I call myself a covered subject because I've been covered by the media for 30 years. And during the time I was mayor, I was covered intensely every single day. And I could watch a story after I did a 30-minute press conference and look at the clips that were isolated by the reporter, and look at the clips that may be isolated by the other reporter and the perspective on the story that was brought by someone else. A story that comes to mind is a story that there was an awful shooting of children on a playground that took place St. Roch Park in New Orleans in 1995. And I've been in office only about 8 to 10 months, not long. And I went out to the playground, and like many playgrounds, the swings were down, the basketball goals were broken. And I met with the residents, and in the conversation said, well, look, let's do something about this playground. I said, okay, I'm going to do something about this playground. I'm going to do something now. So I go back downtown, go to my office, and I say, let's put some equipment there. Let's fix the basketball goals. And I ran head on into the city's procurement system. So as a part of the procurement system, it would have taken 6 to 8 months to go through the bidding process to get the equipment at the park and to do all the repairs that were needed. So I said, what do I need to do? I said, well, sir, you can waive. I said, I'm waiving all these rules right now. And we're going to get this equipment up right now. So we did all of this. The reporter from the local newspaper decided to do the story on the waiver of the rules. That waiving the rules was the story. Why did the mayor waive the rules? waive the procurement rules, go around the process. The story that the African-American broadcast journalist did was on the residents and the playground equipment and the basketball goals that were there for the first time in 10 years. Same set of facts, but a whole different angle and perspective. So many times what you do as African-American, you're not inserting yourself or bringing opinion. You're leveling perspective. No one asked Bill O'Reilly and his cohorts if they were crossing the line and making themselves a part of the story. So I'm going to defend the right and the role and the responsibility of African-American and Hispanic journalists to level the playing field and make sure that the truth is, in fact, the whole truth and not half the truth or a negative truth. You go out and you do a story, you have great power in who you're going to interview, who you're going to put emphasis on, what angle you're going to take. You can be balanced, many ways to be balanced. So I think, you know, as someone who covered for a long time, I saw the ease with which a negative angle. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, that was in my young fiery days. So I ran into the reporter that did the angle on the on the procurement, and he got a little piece of my he got the neighborhood side of me, let's say, you know, because I just got on him. I said, "You must not care about children." I said, "You're doing a story on the angle on some doggone procurement rules, and these people have been suffering, and their kids have been killed, and there was nothing out there that was positive." And I just said, "I'm going to do it." So if I did it once and I had to do it again, I would do it again. So you go print that, sir.
I think I just want to say, I think.
Well, no, I was
going
to
say,
I have asked questions about Bill O'Reilly, and you can read them in my book, Race Baiter. But I did want to ask Jerika, besides covering stuff, we've seen Black journalists rise up inside newsrooms to correct inequities inside their own organizations. We've seen journalists rise up at the New York Times. We've seen journalists rise up at the Philadelphia Inquirer. We've seen a journalist at Essence. Many different places speak up, and it almost feels like we're canaries in a coal mine in an odd way. You know, when we speak up about problems, we can identify them and sort of say, hey, this is a problem that everybody should deal with. But what do you think about this moment where we're seeing Black journalists also speak up for fairness inside their own newsrooms?
I think that's always been the case. It's just sometimes, you know, you don't necessarily get the national attention that you're getting now because of the moment that we're in. I want to piggyback though off of what Mark said, and that I think it's just as important too to call out how those perspectives are changed and shaped because of our experiences that we've had. And hopefully that same journalist that you said, hey, what, you know, you made this big fuss about how I got something done that was bettering the community. It's a moment, hopefully, for that journalist to understand their own bias and how it got in the way of a bigger, more important story. So I think it's, you know, and I love our morning meetings, if you will, because it allows you to have that sort of challenging different narratives or be on record with why you believe this story matters. And I'll tell a quick story. The week before Amy Cooper, George Floyd, that's her name, right? Because I'm
Karen?
like, is it the woman with the dog? But the week before that.
No, I'm sorry. I should have said that.
Y'all trying to get me in trouble. I'm gonna just keep it very, you know.
We definitely are trying to get you.
But the week before that, I remember distinctly feeling annoyed by stories that I felt like we should be covering. And I talked to one of the senior producers and I let it be known, as a Black woman, I'm frustrated. And I took a week off when the Amy Cooper and George Floyd stuff happened, not stuff, because he died, and I don't want to minimize that, but I took the week off, and I remember watching that week, sort of bubbling up to the moment where, Gail was almost in tears and had a moment where she's like, I just feel like it's open season on Black men. And for her to say that on national television, being, very much the face of our morning show, was a big deal. But it was confirmation to me in that moment that, like, what I'm feeling or have been feeling these last several weeks, because it is COVID and everybody's trying to cope and do the best they can, reporting from home, working from home, you have children, etc. I remember feeling, again, it was confirmation, but more importantly, I remember having a conversation with the senior producer, and in me expressing my frustration, she said the words, well, I am fighting, in these kind of smaller meetings on the stories that you keep pitching, but whatever. And I said, did you just say, but whatever? And she got frustrated. And it became this moment where we could have went in our silos, and she could have labeled me one way and I could have labeled her one way. But when things sort of calmed down, I picked up the phone and I called her. I didn't send an email, but I just told her straight up, have you thought about or reflected on the conversation that we had the moment before the moment, if you will, before everything sort of, now we're protesting and all these other stories are coming out and people are opening up about experiences that they've had. And we had a very real conversation that I remember thinking, and this is the type of thing we need to share, because it would have been very easy for me to play the, like, you know what, I'm not dealing with this person unless I absolutely have to. And I think oftentimes we do. But this is also, to me, that moment where we can be very real with each other about why you saying something like, but whatever. And I came to you and said, even though you're white, as a Black woman, I'm frustrated and I'm really having a tough time putting certain stories out there. And it feels like you're not hearing me. And now you're hearing me. You have no choice. Corporations are hearing me, hearing us. And it's a beautiful thing to see. But I think, again, as a journalist, it's sort of being a part of the history and telling the story about what next.
Right. Well, now, Renee is going to have to leave us in a minute, so I want to ask one last question before you go. What's interesting to me also about this moment is that we remember not too long ago when Colin Kaepernick seemed to pay the ultimate price for doing something as simple as kneeling during the national anthem. And now we're at a point where the NFL says, that they're fine with that. And the football team in Washington whose name I will not repeat, is that they're going to change their name from an ethnic slur to something more acceptable. And so I just wanted to ask you, do you have any sense of what's changed in the sports world so that these major corporations, these major teams have done such an about face?
Yeah, I would say a lot of time and perspective has changed. Since we're telling stories, in 2016, I was with the Minnesota Lynx, and that was probably the first time that players had worn stuff on their shooting shirts. So in 2016, my Minnesota Lynx team, we wrote unity and change on the front of our shirts. We put hashtag Black Lives Matter on the back, but we also put a police shield on the back of our jersey, just so people wouldn't get misconstrued what we were talking about. It went terrible. People had no idea why in the world we would put Black Lives Matter on our shooting shirts. They were confused and hurt that they had to choose between their favorite players and the military, America, the cops. They said, we have family in the military. And we were like, yeah, we have family too. And this is before Colin Kaepernick even took the knee. He took a knee that NFL season. The WNBA happens in the summer. So people had no idea where this was coming from. Like, why are athletes being activists? Like, that was more so the feeling. I would say if you fast forward 2016 now to 2020, that's how you can spot progress and a win, because fast forward down to where leagues are saying Black Lives Matter. There's whole initiatives based around how can we be diverse? How can we be inclusive? That's a dramatic change from 2016. And when people are asking me, how will you know that it's working? It's working. These are wins all over. If you see a team in the NFL like a Washington has been like, Washington can't honestly say that they didn't know that this was offensive. You know, the Native American community said since 1968 they've been putting out resolutions for different names. You know, it's been highly publicized. So the reason that Washington is using their mascot name is because FedEx said that they're out. You know, the sponsorship, Nike said that they're out. Now companies are putting something, an action item behind just those words. And now you're seeing those effects. So for me, when people are asking me, you know, how am I doing? How is my mentals? I'm like, yo, I'm great. For the first time ever, people are listening. You know, people are actually doing action items behind the words. So I'm excited about this movement because it's not a moment. I'm excited about it.
I want to make a point, and again, it's a historical point, and thank you, Renee, for the courage that you have exhibited. You know, and if you go back to 1965, just after he won the heavyweight title as an Olympic gold medalist, Cassius Marcellus Clay, Muhammad Ali converted to Islam after his first win beating Sonny Liston. And there was tremendous outrage and outcry. He later on decided to become a conscientious objector to the draft. Well, originally, Jim Brown, Curtis McClinton, and Willie Davis, and a whole host of players went to go meet with Muhammad Ali, ostensibly to convince him to change his position, and not defy the draft. After Muhammad Ali spoke to them and convinced them of the passion and truth and conviction of his belief, that meeting turned into them holding a press conference. Bill Russell, Jim Brown, Curtis McClinton, a young college basketball player named Lou Alcindor.
That's right.
That supported, it's a legendary press conference in 1966, I believe it was, to say we support Muhammad Ali. Now imagine the risk that these players were taking in the middle 1960s to be able to do this. Of course, 2 years later, in Mexico City, Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fist with a black glove on the stand at the Olympics after they had won gold medals on behalf of the United States. They were summarily dismissed from the team, ejected from Athletes Village, and sent home. 3 days later, George Foreman defeated a Russian boxer to become the heavyweight gold medalist. And someone gave him a flag, an American flag, and he twirled the American flag around while he was in the ring after he had won. And the press created this contrast between John Carlos and Tommy Smith and George Foreman. I make the point that Colin Kaepernick and athletes expressing their views on issues of social justice, LeBron doing it, Renee, you doing it, Colin Kaepernick doing it in the way in which they've done it, is part of the long tradition of civil rights. Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champ, was arrested ostensibly because he dated white women and he traveled with white women across state lines, and they accused him of all kinds of awful things. So this idea that athletes, and I applaud the athletes because it was the pressure of the Players Coalition that helped to change the NFL's official position, I think, in a significant way. The players standing up, the players asking and demanding that the league make stronger commitments to social and economic justice. So I don't want the players to ever surrender their voice, to ever surrender their platform, to always use it smartly and intelligently. And I'm looking for Colin Kaepernick to be signed by a team. Someone should sign him. I think many of us would like to see him play. He was a tremendous athlete. People need to remember he took the San Francisco 49ers to the Super Bowl back in, I think it was 13. So do not think that this idea that what players are doing today is something out of the ordinary. It's consistent with the long way in which athletes have used their voice on social and economic issues.
Exactly. And I do want to thank Renee Montgomery, the guard for the Atlanta Dream. She's got to leave us, but we're gonna keep the conversation going for a little bit longer. So thanks a lot, Renee. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Renee. Nice meeting you.
Renee, take care.
All right.
And Mark, I did want to ask. You asked the question about whether or not this was a movement or a moment, but it certainly seems as if a lot has gotten done in a very short period of time. We've seen TV shows get canceled. We've seen protests all over the globe. We've seen an NFL team where the owner said he was never going to change the name wind up being pushed to change the name of the team. It feels like people suddenly woke up in a way that they haven't before. And so I'm wondering, do you agree? And if you do, why do you think it happened now?
Look, we'll count, we'll mark, we'll applaud each victory, each small victory, each symbolic victory, because they are important. But as we sit, poverty is still stifling. Black people are still too often the victim of police violence and gun violence at large. The racial wealth gap is still 10-1. The graduation rates from high school are still disparate. The underlying conditions will take a sustained effort over years for us to be able to make. And we have to have the patience and the determination and the fortitude for a sustained, long effort to undo many of the things that are unjust, unequal, and unfair. I hope that people can see that at the end of it, or down the road, there's a better America. There's a better nation, a just and a fair nation, a nation where there's little or no poverty, a nation where everyone has equal opportunity, where racism and religious bigotry and hatred are a thing of the past. These are worth working and fighting for. So we've got to celebrate the spirit of the movement and what this means. And I think what happened here, or my sense is, George Floyd's murder on the streets of Minneapolis was as transparent as any act of police misconduct and brutality as we've ever seen. There wasn't a single or even a scintilla of evidence that he resisted, that he did anything untoward, that he was somehow creating a problem. So one's eyes didn't lie. People all over the world could see it was an unjustified act. So here we were, like everyone else, like the people on the sidewalk who taped the 17-year-old taped it, watching a man die at the hands of the police, with 3 officers holding him down, with 1 officer standing watch, with a group of citizens on the sidewalk begging and pleading and exhorting the officers. If there was ever an act of injustice live and in living color, this was it. And people reacted. You know, there are times in American history where moral outrage exceeds politics, exceeds ideology, exceeds. And I think it was one of those moments. And that's why we saw this tremendous outpouring, but it must continue. Look, protest must be carried through towards political participation at the ballot box, which must be carried through to advocacy to to bring about policy change at every level. Ask us in a year, is this a movement and not a moment? I think it is. I feel it is, but it's too early to tell. The burden is on all of us to ensure it.
So, Jerika, I'll ask that question to you a different way, which is that we've seen Ahmaud Arbery. We saw a video of that. We saw a video of Philando Castile getting killed. We have seen videos of Black people, Black men, especially killed by police in unfair circumstances before. Do you have any sense about why this one was the one that seemed to really reach people?
It was clear that it was wrong. And this was the first video I recall police officers from across this country saying that shouldn't have happened. That didn't have to happen. That was not my training, and the sheer amount of time when you just sit in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and you realize how much time that is. Right. It makes no sense. So I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. Again, I don't know anyone who said, well, he should have done this, or maybe it's wrong. It was wrong. It was horrifying to watch. And it's etched in so many people's minds now. It's one of those, as I'm watching the news, I have a 6-year-old daughter bouncing around here, and half the time I have to turn the TV off or say, go in the next room, because it was that brutal. And just thinking about it, when you think about your first time seeing it and you're just like, oh my God. And the look that the officer had on his face, digging more into George Floyd's body with his knee, as if to say almost to the camera, and you can't do anything about it. So I think that's why it feels different. And then when I also, we're talking about, overcoming social injustice, the Black Lives Matter movement, and understanding this isn't something that happened overnight. They celebrated recently 7 years, after the acquittal of George Zimmerman. And when I spoke to 2 of the co-founders, Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi, they said this isn't about something where we expect results overnight. We're in it for the long haul. This is getting people registered to vote. This is being at meetings within counties and mobilizing people. It's understanding, learning from people like the late Congressman Lewis, that you have to have a strategy. So I think, early on when we were talking about the next group and what's next in terms of leadership, I think the younger people that are sort of on the front lines of this movement, hopefully, are very clear on what it's going to take to see the change that we want to see. And I think there's nothing wrong with wanting equality for everybody. But again, it's a wait and see game. But it's amazing to sort of even be in this moment to cover it and to cover history and be a part of it.
Another thing that seems to be singular about this moment, especially for journalists of color, is that there is an occupant in the White House who has been incredibly accused of being racist and seems to have a way of dealing with journalists of color, especially women, in ways that are disrespectful in public press conferences. How difficult is it to cover someone like Donald Trump? And some of the things that he does seem to indicate that he's racist, or that at the very least, he has some significant problems with treating people of color fairly.
I feel like nothing surprises me. And, he just did an interview recently where he questioned the validity of 1619 and said, what is it? And I don't get it. And they don't even know what it is. Who is they? And why don't you get it? And what is so hard about understanding that there's an effort now to not just talk about, sort of post-modern day slavery, but before, how we got to this point and the history in those hundreds of years of what took place and how that impacts today. And I think when there's a total disregard to recognize the history, and understand it. It's scary, it's frustrating, but I don't put my faith in any human, any man. So you do your job, but nothing surprises me in terms of what comes out of our president's mouth. Nothing surprises me.
Mark, you were going to jump in there?
I'm just saying that, I think that the way in which the president has treated Black women journalists has been awful, and beyond what you would expect of a president of the United States. But the voters get the last word. The people get the last word in this interesting contest, and so there's a chance in the fall for people to express in a democratic system how they indeed feel. I mean, I never would have imagined that a modern president of the United States would defend the Confederate flag. I'm a child of the South. Grew up looking at the Confederate flag. I grew up every day going past the statue of PGT Beauregard, driving on a street named after Jefferson Davis, looking at schools named after every conceivable Confederate general, and knew the history that people had intentionally put these up years after the Civil War had been lost to try to rebrand and sanitize the South's, if you will, embrace of slavery. The idea that the president of the United States would somehow endorse, embrace, and try to conflate the quote unquote display of the Confederate flag on public property with the First Amendment is the same as saying I have a right to hate speech because it's protected by the First Amendment. The presidency stands and should stand and has historically stood for the standards by which we govern ourselves as a country, the values by which we govern ourselves as a country. And I just think that people are not tricked. They're not fooled. I think most people are not falling for it. In fact, I think when the president does these sorts of things, it just increases the outrage that many of us feel and many of us have against his approach to things, his rhetoric, his policies. But let me say this, the voters, the people get the last word. And so the voters will get they'll write the last chapter, the finale of this story.
All right. Well, we're coming to the end of our panel, and
thank you for having me. And I've got to jump on because I'm about 30 minutes behind my previous call. I apologize for all the technical issues, and always great to be with the great Jerika Duncan of CBS News. Absolutely.
Thank you,
with you, Eric of NPR.
I always learn so much when we're on a call together or I'm interviewing you. So thank you.
Exactly. So I want to sort of officially close this out by thanking Toyota once again for supporting the NABJ/NAHJ virtual convention and for supporting this panel. And many thanks to Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League, Jerika Duncan, the national correspondent for CBS This Morning, and Renee Montgomery, who had to leave us early, who's a guard for the Atlanta Dream in the WNBA. Thank you all so much. And we hope that those of you who have watched this panel will stay engaged with the other panels that we have coming up during the NABJ NAHJ virtual convention. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on down the road.
Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Bye now.